Power Query's user interface is absolutely phenomenal, and an average user wouldn't have to go beyond the user interface for 95% of the data problems. But every once in a while, you're going to come across a problem that is going to make you scratch your head and you're going to say that, how am I going to solve this problem? Let me bring to you such nuances and 7 incredibly powerful Power Query functions that help you go beyond the user interface. No further ado, let's start. I'm going to divide this video into 2 parts. Part number 1 is going to be accessing UI functions, meaning some things which are already built into the UI, but if you tweak them a little, you get fantastic results. And part number 2 is going to be beyond UI functions, functions that are just not available in the user interface of Power Query, and that let you do a lot of good work of data cleaning. Let's just start with the UI first. All right, the first function that I'd like to speak about is the table.addcolumns function, and you can obviously get that through the user interface of Power Query. Let's just take a look. So I've got this simple table and I'd like to add a column. Let's just take a look at the behavior of the function and then how can we modify it to do some cool work with data. All right, so I'm going to go over to the add columns tab, and sure enough, here we have the custom column. Clicking on that gives me this custom column box, and let's just write a pseudo 1 number in there. So if I just happen to write 1 and click on OK, you're going to see that we definitely get the table.addColumn function automatically added because we clicked a bunch of buttons in the Power Query user interface. Now, if you were to take a look at this function gives you an ability to add a column, but if you just carefully study the different arguments of the function, you're going to see that it has got a few interesting applications. So the first argument of the function is, hey, give me the table that you're trying to work with on which you're trying to create a column, and that is nothing but the previous step. Then it says, hey, what's the name of the column, which is right here, and then it says the function to create the column. This function simply means what formula do you want to put in every single row of the table that is going to form the values of the column. Now, at the moment, I'm saying that in every single row, write 1, but what's going to happen if I write a blank function? Note that the last part of this argument has to be a function. It cannot just be a value. So if I just put a comma, you're going to see that the last part is nothing but the column generator as a function. And one way to write a blank function in Power Query is just to write the each and the underscore keyword. If I just write the each and the underscore keywords, you're going to see that in every single row, what you get is a record, and record means nothing but the row of the table. So here you get the data of the first row of the table. You can see that all of these values kind of are right here in the first row, and then here you get the second row, the third row, the fourth row, so on and so forth. Now, once you have uncovered this ability of this function to go row by row, and in every single row it produces a record, then you can pretty much do anything with the record. Giving you an example. So let me just go ahead and start to modify this behavior. At the moment, we have an underscore right here, and that produces a record. Now, I would like to transform this record into maybe a list. So I'll say record.toList, and I'm going to start the bracket and I'm going to close the bracket, and I'm going to click on OK. And sure enough, this actually becomes a list. Now, once you have a list, you can skip the first item off of the list and maybe total all of these numbers up. So I can just go right here and I can say, now that I have a list, I want to skip the first item of the list. So I'm going to use list.skip, and that is going to skip the first item of the list by default because list.skips the first item of the list by default. And then I'm going to sum this list. So I'll say list.sum, start the bracket and close the bracket towards the end. And now this is just going to give me the sum. Sure enough, you can just go ahead and change the name of the column right here, call this as a sum, and this is absolutely dynamic. Now, the point that I was trying to make through this was that once you have uncovered that table.addColumns function is going to generate a record through a blank function in every single row of the table, using that record, you can pretty much do anything that you would like. And that's how you enhance the capability that is not available in the user interface. In case you're enjoying the video thus far, you're absolutely going to love my new book on Power Query Beyond the User Interface. In the book, I talk about advanced techniques that go far beyond the user interface and teach you what lies behind those clicks of Power Query, especially using the M language to solve more harder and nastier data cleaning problems. The initial few chapters are based on the fundamentals, understanding those basic building blocks like lists, records, working with tables, manipulation of the data. And more advanced chapters cover like iterations, custom functions, nested tables, and a whole lot of more complicated aspects that take you to the next level. The interesting thing about the book is that the book has been written in such a way that it contains no jargons. I've used a very, very friendly language to explain the most complicated concepts in a fun way. And the book contains a lot of diagrams and images to help you cruise through the book as if you were just watching my video, but on print. If you buy the book before the 7th of February, I'm also very happy to give you access to special bonuses, which is nothing but some advanced functions in Power Query, custom functions in Power Query, and advanced case studies as well. Note that these bonuses are worth $150 and you're going to get them absolutely free along with the book in case you order or pre-order the book before the 7th of February. I've poured in a lot of care and attention and love into this book, and I hope that you thoroughly enjoy the book. Grab a copy today. Let's explore the next pivoting function in Power Query and how can you enhance beyond the capabilities of the user interface. Take a look at this very interesting example and then I will talk about the function real quick. So I've got this 3-columnar table, product, color, and the region, and maybe I'd like to pivot the data. Let me try to show you or give you a glimpse of what am I trying to get at. So I'd like to have maybe the products here. So products, and I would like to have all the unique products here. So let's say product A, B, C, and D. And then I'd like to have the regions in the column. So you will have maybe region number 1, maybe let's just say north, and then the region number 2 is, let's say, west. So I will have these two regions, and matching these two values, let's say product A and region N, which is north, I'd like to mention all the products or all the colors of the products right here. So howsoever many number of colors we have, I'd like to mention underneath that. How do we do such a kind of thing? Obviously, this is pivoting because we are converting the regions into columns, so we will have to pivot the data. Let's just try to take a look at how that is done in Power Query. So I'm going to go over to the region columns right here, and then I'm going to go over to the transform tab right here. And in the transform, I have called something called as pivot column. If I happen to click that, it brings up this dialog box, which is where it asks me a question. It says that the column that is being selected, I'm going to make columns from that. So north is going to become one column and west is going to become another column. Then it says that, hey, what would you like to put it in the value? So if you remember the pivot grid, we had north and south here. We had the names of the products here. So A, B, C, and D. And this section, which is the combination of the regions as well as the products, is called the values section of the pivot table. Now, what would you like to put in all of these values here? So I would like to put the color in the values, and that's where I will just mention that. Everything which is remaining in the data set is going to form the rows of the data. So obviously product is going to form the rows of the data. I'm gonna maybe click on OK, and now what we get is nothing but the products as well as the regions right here. Now, sure enough, we do get the regions, but underneath those regions in terms of values, I don't see the name of the color. I actually see the count of that. Let me just go ahead and modify my aggregation for a quick second. So I'll just go back and I'll say that in the advanced option, I would like to maybe do not aggregate and just mention the data just like that. I click on do not aggregate, I click on OK, and we land up with some errors. So we have an error here. Let's just go take a look at the error. It says too many elements in the enumeration to complete. That simply means that for the value A and for the region north, there must be multiple values, and multiple values cannot be fed right here. Let's just go take a look at the data. So if I just go back to the source data, if I take a look at A and I take a look at A and I take a look at north and north, you can see that we have two different values right here, red and white, and therefore both the values cannot fit in there. Now, how do we solve this problem? Now, let's just go take a look at this particular function. So this function just a while ago was working when the summarization was a count and it was not aggregation. So let's just revert it to that. So I'm going to go right here and I'm going to say, hey, why don't you just maybe in the advanced operations do count? That's fine. Click on OK. And this starts to work fine. Now, at the moment, if I just go take a look at the function, it says table.pivot. On which table would you like to apply the pivot table to? So that's my previous table, which is nothing but source. Hey, give me the columns right here, and these are nothing but your columns. And then it says the color happens to be something that we will put it in the values. And then it says list.count. So if you take a look at the behavior of this particular function, in the last argument of this function, you're going to see that the aggregations should come in again as a function. That means howsoever you want to aggregate the values, that should come in as a function. And we now know the default behavior of writing the function, and that is nothing but the each and the underscore. So rather than actually writing one of the native functions of Power Query, I'm going to go ahead and write the each and the underscore keyword. And let's just take a look at what happens. So if I just do that, you're going to see that we end up with a list. And if I just maybe peek into the list, I see two values. Now that we have uncovered that the table.pivot function in the last argument has a list by default, we can just combine the values of the list. And now I can go ahead and I can say that I would like to do a text.combine. I'll start the bracket, and that underscore is giving me the list, and I'd like to have a delimiter which is nothing but a comma and a space. I'm going to close the bracket in the end, and this is exactly what we wanted. Another very interesting function in Power Query is the table group function that can summarize the data, but it can go a lot beyond the user interface provides you with. Take a look at a simple example that I'm trying to work with. So I've got products and the units and the price in a single column. That means that the product is mentioned twice. The first row is nothing but the units and the second row is nothing but the price. Again, product name C, we have the units and the price. And product B, units and the price. And we would just want to have the total sales. So I would like to write something like this, A, and what is the sales for that, which is nothing but the units into price. And then I'd like to write C, what's the sales for that, units into price, so on and so forth for the entire products. Now, obviously that is a summarization that I have to do, but let's just take a look at how the default summarization works in Power Query. So I'm going to go over to the transform tab, and therefore I have the group by feature. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm just going to jump over to the advanced, and I'll say that I'd like to summarize by the product. Sure enough, I would like to create a column called the count. Doesn't matter for now, I'm just saying count. The operation is count rows. That's fine. Click on OK, and therefore we land up with this. Now, every single product did have 2 rows of data, and that's what it shows. If you now take a look at the table.group function, and the way it behaves is that you're going to see that the table.group function asks you for a table. Hey, what table are you trying to work with? I'm trying to work with the source table. Then it says, hey, what's the column that you would like to summarize? And I'd like to summarize the product column. All right. Then it says the summarization is going to have 3 parts of its own. So it's going to have the name of the column, which is right here. And then it's going to write a function through which every single row is going to be summarized, and the data type which is applied, which is nothing but the number. Now let's just go start to tweak with this function. So if I just happen to delete the comma and read the arguments of that, it says again the aggregations as a list. And because we know that this is using a function each and the underscore somehow, let me just kind of break the table.row count function that counts the number of rows, and just let me write a blank function. Let's just see what happens. The max that it is going to do is break the query, but here I am with you. So I'm going to go ahead and say each underscore right here and press enter. And what this is doing at the moment is that this is producing a table, and you can do pretty much anything with the table once you've understood that for every single column that you create, what you get is an underlying table for all of the rows of A. If I happen to peek inside of the table, you're going to see all the rows that match A and the units and the price for that. At the moment, I just have to take these 2 values and multiply them. Now, of course, we can extract a list from a table, and the easiest way to do that is that you write the name of the table. In this case, the name of the table is underscore, and then I'm going to write the name of the column, which is units, and then I can write the price. And therefore, I have extracted a list. Now, even if you happen to remove the underscore, it is still going to work, but let that stay for a bit. Now, I'm going to say that I have a list and I just want to multiply the values of the list. Now I can write something like list.product. I can start the bracket and I can close the bracket here in the end. And of course, one more thing that I'm going to do is this is not going to be a count, but instead this is going to be my sales. And now I get the sales value. How awesome is that? In case you're liking the video thus far, you're going to absolutely love my courses on Power Query, DAX, data modeling, and especially the M language, which is where I break down very complicated concepts around data cleaning and ETL, and then trying to help you understand that how do you build or how do you frame logic to be able to build your solution on your own data. These are extremely structured courses, which is where I take students right from scratch, build up the fundamentals, and then we go on start talking about more advanced, more complicated problems. Hundreds of students have joined my courses and they have left some raving feedback about the course. In case you're interested to take your skills to the next level, I'll highly encourage that you take a look at the courses and they will be super beneficial. Thanks so much. Another very interesting function in Power Query is skipping the rows from the table, and it brings to you several options which are obviously not there in the UI. Take a look at this junk table that I'm working with, and clearly I can see that a few rows up on the top of this table are junk and I want to get rid of that. Sure enough, you know how to do that. You can go over to the Home tab, and in the Home tab, you're going to find that we have something called as Remove Rows. Sure enough, I can click on Remove the top rows. How many rows from the top? I can write the number 3. I'm good to go, and the table is all good now. The problem with this particular approach at the moment is that the number 3 has been hard-coded right here because the user interface of Power Query does not allow us to write a condition. The problem with the 3 is that next time you have 4 junk rows or 2 junk rows, you're definitely going to lose some legit data. And I don't really want to write 3 here, but I want to write a condition. Let's just take a look at first, this function accepts a condition or not. So if I just happen to delete the 3 and read the IntelliSense of the function, it says, hey, give me a count or give me a condition. So sure enough, this does accept a condition. condition. Now the thing with conditions is that a condition always have to give you a true or a false, and therefore this formula is only going to work. That means no matter what you write here should have to give you a true or a false, otherwise this formula is not going to work. So we got to write some condition here that gives me true or a false, but let's just say you and I don't know how to write that condition, right? So let's just go ahead and take help from the user interface of Power Query. So I'm going to get rid of this particular step and I'm going to make a new column. And in the new column, I'm just going to go ahead and happen to write the underscore. We just saw a while ago that the table.addcolumns function, when created through the custom column, produces a record in every single row. For now, let's just click on OK, and that produces a record. And the record can obviously be converted into a list. So I'm going to go ahead and this underscore that I have created, or a record that I have created, I'm going to transform that into a list using the function record.toList. And I will start the bracket, I will close the bracket, press enter, and sure enough, this actually becomes a list. Now, in the list right here, I can make a simple check. And the check is that keep removing the rows till the time you find any value null. So you can see that there are two values null. Sure enough, this cannot be the headers because the headers need to be filled with all the values. That's the assumption that I'm making. So I can go over to the next one. Again, you have null values. Next one, again, you have null values. Keep removing till the time you have the null rows. Now, how do I produce a true and false? Because if you remember, the table.skip function is asking me for a true and false. So I can go ahead and start to write something like, now that I have a list, so I can say something like list.contains, and I can start the bracket. This is my list, and does it contain a null or not? And as simple as that. I click on OK, and this actually produces a true or a false output. Now I know that I have been able to write a function that produces a true or a false output that I can feed into the table.skip function. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this each part and all the way till the place where the function ends, Control C on that. And I'm going to delete this particular step. I delete it. And again, I'm going to go over to the home tab and I can say that I want to remove rows, remove top rows. And sure enough, I want to remove the top 3 rows of the data. That brings me the hard-coded 3, which I will cancel and I will feed my formula right here. Now, what this formula is saying is that go in every single row and perform the same check that we did it while adding a column. But the only difference is that while we were adding a column, we could have seen the trues and the falses. Now we can't see it. The rows are just going to be removed. It doesn't change the output because of course it has removed the first 3 rows. You can now write a condition instead of being stuck with the hard-coded numbers in the table.skip. Let's raise the bar and move to part 2, which is where we're going to take a look at functions which are not available in the user interface of Power Query, and you just have to understand the behavior of how these functions are going to work. Let's start with this. So I've got this simple table right here, and the table does not have any headers. So it's column 1, column 2, and column 3, and I'd like to give some headers right here. Now, of course, I can just go ahead and rename the headers. So column 1 could be renamed as product, this could be something, and this could be something, but I don't really want to do that. You're going to see that we already have another query right here called query 1, which is where we have 3 values, and these are the 3 values that I wanted to put it on top of that table as headers. That means the headers are going to come from here and the data is going to come from some other query. This is going to be a common scenario while doing some advanced Power Query operations. How do you do that? I'm going to talk about 2 functions which are my absolute favorite that are going to get the job done. Take a look. So I'm going to go back to my query. And the first function is actually going to break the table apart into 3 different lists. So this is going to be list number 1, this is going to be list number 2, and this is going to be list number 3. So every column gets converted into a list, right? Let's just do that. So I'm going to maybe make a new step. And in the new step, I'm going to say table.twocolumns. Table.twocolumns function simply takes the table, which is nothing but the source table. That is nothing but my previous step, which is this particular table right here. And it is going to take the columns of the table and convert them into a list. If I now commit on this formula, you're going to see that the table is broken and it has now given me 3 different lists. This is not a table anymore. Now, what you can do is you can take these lists and put it back into a table. So I can now say that I've got these 3 lists and I can put them back into a table. So I can say, hey, table.fromcolumns. I can start the bracket and I can close the bracket. And now this is actually going to convert it into a table again. But you're going to mock me at this state because where we started from, where we are at the moment, are not different places. They are exactly the same output. So how have we made any difference? So what this function table.fromcolumn does is that while you're putting the table back together from the lists, it allows you an additional input to declare the columns of those lists or not. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So you know that we've already got the columns right here in query number 1, but these columns need to be in the form of a list. So let's just convert this into a list. I can right click on the column and I can click on drill down. This actually becomes a list. Let's just call this as columns. and I'm going to go ahead in 5.6 query and say that, hey, the names of the columns are going to come from this list right here. This is nothing but columns. And now we are good to go. And that's my ID, that's my color, and that is my region. So these two functions, table.tocolumns and table.fromcolumns, are extremely beneficial to break apart the tables and then do whatever with those tables as an interim operation, and then put them back together with nice column headers. My last and my absolute favorite function is the list.transform function. If you have a list and you'd like to do some custom transformations on that, it's a brilliant function to learn because list transformations are not available in the user interface of Power Query. Take a look at this. So of course I have product, Jan, Feb, and March, and maybe I'd like to unpivot the data. So I'm sure you know how to do that. Right click on the product, you're going to say unpivot other columns, and sure enough, the data is unpivoted. The only problem is that because I right clicked on the product column is hard coded, and therefore this is going to cause a problem should there be any other column added right here, which is not a month. So let's just say that you add another column called the category column, and that now you're supposed to actually click on two different columns and then say unpivot other data, and that is not going to be done automatically. So I want this column not to be hard fed, and I want this column to be automated. That means this one should be automated. And if you take a look at this, this is nothing but a list, and that's where we're going to use the function list.transform. So let's just take a look at it. I'm going to get rid of this particular step, and I'm going to go ahead and first extract all the names of the columns. So I'm going to say table.columnNames, start the bracket and close the bracket in the end. Sure enough, we get all the names of the columns, and these columns are nothing but a list. And now is when I can start to transform these columns. And my transformation logic is going to look something like this. Pick up this list, then pick up every single item of the list and try to convert them into a date. If you are being converted into a date, I don't want you. But if you're not being converted into a date, then of course I want you. So I'm going to go ahead and say something like this. I'm going to say that I will have a list that I'd like to transform. So list.transform. I'll start the bracket, and that is nothing but my list. And the transformation for the moment is nothing. So I will just happen to write a blank function, close the bracket, press enter, and nothing happens to the list. Now I'm going to go ahead and attach a 1. So I'm going to say something like, hey, just take that number or the value or the text, whatever that is, and attach a 1 to that. So 1 product, 1 Jan, 1 Feb, 1 March. All right. Now convert that into a date. So I'll say date.from. Start the bracket and close the bracket and press enter, and we are good to go. Now, of course, this returned me an error because one product cannot be converted into a date. Sure enough, these can be converted into a date and they are good to go. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to keep the errors. I don't want to delete the errors. I want to keep the errors. But unfortunately, there was a function in Power Query to keep the errors of the table, but not of the list. So one option is that you can convert it into a table and then keep the errors, but we want to continue working with the list. So what do we do about it? So I'm going to go ahead and say something like try. Just try working with this value, and I'll just maybe kind of commit to this. You can see that once we do the try keyword, everything gets converted into a record. And let me just explain to you real quick. If you take a look at the first value, which had the error, you're going to see that the has error column in the record returns a true. That means it has the error. And if you take a look at the second value, it does not have the error, and you see the value itself. Now we're going to use these trues and falses. So here we have a true, that means the error was found, and here we have a false, that means the error was not found. Now what we can do is we can go ahead and say that this particular try keyword returns me a record, and the record has a column called the has error column, which has the value true and false. Let me just get that. So I can go ahead and reference the has error column, and that actually gives me the trues and falses, of course. Now we're going to play a hack. Now at the moment, if you remember, we wanted to keep the values with the trues and not the falses. That means the non-dates. Now the list.transform actually converts the values into trues and falses. I don't want to see the conversion at the moment. I just want to keep the values. So if I just happen to cancel the transform word and instead use a list.select keyword, I will be able to just select the values that were returning the true in the second part of the function, because list.select second part is nothing but a condition, and the condition should return me a true or false. This was a true, and hence we have got the product. The only difference is that this is no more a hard-coded list. This is a list dynamically generated from the formula. Now, of course, we can go ahead and say something like unpivot. So I'm just going to go right here and right click here and say that I want to unpivot other columns. Click on that, insert a step in between, not a problem. I'm going to drag this step towards in the end, and this is going to reference the source. That is good. The product is hard-coded, which it should not be hard-coded. Rather, it should actually be this particular step, which is custom 1. Let's just change the name, give it a better name, call this as columns. And here I'm going to replace the product with nothing but the columns. The output doesn't change because we haven't added another column right here. But in case we do add another column, this is going to be a dynamic output. As a last thought, never learn the function themselves, never mug them up. Always learn the behavior of the function and how that function works. And then you try to mimic that behavior to solve the exact problem that you're working with. In case you'd like to learn more advanced Power Query tricks, I've got another video for you to watch. I'll see you there.